Good morning. Everybody hear me? And I think even my wife is listening. I'm going to make introductions, but first I will introduce my wife, Nancy, and I refer to her each day as my beloved. And so she got married about the same time and I got married about the time all of this started, a little before. So we went off to Connecticut together and lived in Quonset hut there to start things out. Well, now I will call our gathering together, and my name is David Swanson, and I'll introduce some of the folks that are here right now. We have Judge Yoder from McKean County. My old homestead was in Ludlow, so I know about that. And Sam Bonavita was an attorney. He's here. And Judge, that's why I'm introducing you that way. All right. Now then, these to my right are members of the bar. And so I'm not going to name everybody, but it's nice to have you here. Why don't you stand anyway, all members of the bar. And I'm a retired attorney, too, so I can stand a little bit. All right, then we have some other people here, and I hope that I get everybody in the right order. From Warren High School, we have Melissa Becker from Warren High School with some advanced placement students in the social studies area, and they're seated over here. Why don't you folks stand up just for a little bit? And then, speaking of school, Maureen Landry, I hope I get this right, and Jennifer Mandeville are teachers here with students from St. Joseph's School. Could they stand? Thank you. And then we have Dan Glotz here with some Eagle Scouts. Can you stand, Dan, and have your Scout stand? So I once was an Eagle Scout myself, and my favorite merit badge, I won't ask you to guess, was bird study, because, I've been able to use it ever since, and it's a source of joy. Okay, now, I think that I have got through the introductions, and I will now introduce for you Mr. Greg Peterson, an attorney from Jamestown, New York. Oh, incidentally, his grandfather grew up near Ludlow, too, in a place called Wildcat. So he can identify with Ludlow and McKean County as well. And he is with the Robert Jackson Center and a member there, and the fellow who really got all of this started. And I'll introduce him. What we're going to do is that Greg will talk for a while, because until Senator Specter arrives, and then we will kind of have him sit down and to continue at a later time. So I guess we're ready for you, Greg.
Thank you. As you can see the way this is structured, I'm the warm-up act for some of you older folks. I'm the Ed McMahon. Before we actually hit the drum roll, Johnny Carson comes on, and we then actually have the program. But I can't lose an opportunity to talk to students, to talk to folks from Warren County about Robert Jackson and the Robert Jackson Center. Some of the attorneys have heard some of this before, but it's important, and I think for you folks, it's really important. The Robert Jackson Center is located in Jamestown, New York, just over the border, and it's designed to advance the legacy of Justice Robert H. Jackson. The question is, why bother? Really, why bother? And the answer is, Justice Jackson is an answer to a recently asked Jeopardy question. Name the only person in the history of the United States to be an Attorney General, a Solicitor General, and Justice of the United States Supreme Court. And the answer is Robert Jackson. That's cool. Now, you go on and you learn a little bit more that he was born right here in Warren County, Pennsylvania, Spring Creek Township, just down the road. He was born in 1892. He traveled, his family took him over to Frewsburg. He graduated from high school in Frewsburg. Then he spent 1 year in Jamestown High School and never went to college. Never went to college. Now, all you students, we hope you all go to college. Don't follow the path here. But you'll see why this life is important. Never went to college, went to 1 year of law school, but never graduated from law school. And you'd have to say, how did he become an answer to that Jeopardy question? An incredibly interesting story. Why? Because he enjoyed reading, writing, and he really worked very hard at his studies. All of you, when you leave today, will get one of these. Compliments of Community Eye Care Specialist, DLS Financial Services, Haynes & Company, Attorney Bob Hampson, who've made this available free to all of you so you can learn a little bit more about Robert Jackson. So grab it as you're leaving. There's also some additional information on Justice Jackson biographically. But let me continue this. Because remember what I said? Born here, he's your guy. He was in turn Frewsburg, Jamestown, never went to college, never graduated from law school, read for the law, became a member of the Bar Association at the earliest age possible, age 21, practiced law in Jamestown, represented the Blair Company, very close to the Blairs, and represented Corey Jamestown, represented various folks in the Corey Warren area, of which we have files on. Then, when he was in Albany Law School for that 1 year, he got to know a guy named Franklin Roosevelt. Students, Franklin Roosevelt was a governor of New York, president of the United States in 4 terms. They became friends. During that time period that President Roosevelt was in office in 1934, he asked Robert Jackson, an attorney in Jamestown, New York, from Warren County, Pennsylvania, whether he wanted to go to Washington to be what was then known as the chief counsel for the Internal Revenue Service. And the answer was, yeah, I'll go over there for 1 year. Interestingly enough, his first matter there, he was asked to try a guy named Andrew Mellon. Down in Pennsylvania, we kind of know that name, Andrew Mellon. And he had to try him for civil tax fraud, and guess where? Pittsburgh. So if you can imagine trying your first lawsuit for tax matters in Pittsburgh against Andrew Mellon, you'd say, wow, that's fairly daunting. Guess what? He won. And when you go to Washington, D.C., you students or anybody goes to the Portrait Gallery in Washington, D.C., you'll see a nice plaque. It'll say, all of these portraits given through the beneficence of Andrew Mellon. You'd say, wow, isn't that nice? The reality, that was the settlement of the civil tax fraud suit, which Mellon was found guilty, or there was a judgment against him for $750,000. So that's the deal. So when you go there, know that Jackson piece. Jackson became, after that, he hung around for the balance of his life. Again, Assistant Attorney General, Solicitor General, which means he argues before the United States, on behalf of the United States, before the Supreme Court. And therefore, in fact, Louis Brandeis stated that Jackson, because of his success there, should be the Solicitor General for life. He's that good. Then he became an Attorney General for your World War II buffs. He's the guy who was responsible for writing the opinion for President Roosevelt on the Lend-Lease. You'll study that. You'll study the fact that President Roosevelt, before we got into the war, actually cut a deal to exchange bases for ships. And the issue was whether or not Congress had to approve that. Roosevelt got an opinion from Jackson, Robert Jackson, then Attorney General, saying it was okay as an executive power. So Jackson was in the middle of all that and allegedly wrote the opinion up in Jamestown, New York, at a park, sitting there with a guy named Fred Dunn. Who knows? Then he became, after Attorney General, he became the 82nd Justice of the United States. Only 81 before him. How cool, because he came from here, Warren County. Guess what? Never went to college, never graduated from law school, but he read and read and read. In fact, we have his reading list. And all of you would look at that and you'd be embarrassed the number of classics and books you haven't read. But Jackson took it very seriously. And then Jackson stayed on the Supreme Court and handled such cases as Brown versus Board of Education, the Korematsu case, and the one that's the hottest ticket right now is the Youngstown Steel Seizure case, where a lot of conversation as to what the inherent powers are of the President of the United States. President Truman took over the steel industry in 1952, and the issue is, could he do it? Jackson's opinion is now the gold standard, the one that's quoted by all the current justices with regards to how you define whether or not the president crosses the line. That's quite remarkable. Again, a guy never graduated from law school, never went to college, never graduated from law school, from Warren County, Pennsylvania. And then he died in 1954, and the funeral services were up in Jamestown, New York. He's buried in Frewsburg, New York, just right over the border. And all 8 justices of the United States Supreme Court came to his funeral. Never happened before, hasn't happened since. That's the respect they had for Jackson. We're talking Earl Warren, Felix Frankfurter, Hugo Black, William Douglas, all came in a train to Warren. The body was actually taken off here in Warren. The family went to the Blairs. They spent time with the Blairs, then came up to Jamestown. The justices came into Jamestown. Incredible. But the piece of the puzzle that in his biography that I just skipped over was in 1945, he was the chief prosecutor at the International Tribunal at the Nuremberg trials. That's the trial that ended World War II. That's the trial that was against the Hermann Goerings, the Hesses, Rosenbergs, etc. And right here, right over here, Sam Bonavita, an attorney from Warren, Pennsylvania, guess what? He was in Nuremberg and had an opportunity to meet with Justice Jackson on several occasions. It's a great story, a story unto itself. But we have a Warren County attorney who has a connect. Also, I don't know if time will permit, so let's talk about it right now. Sam Bonavita also has a connect with our speaker, Senator Specter. Sam Bonavita was a district attorney here in Warren County. Sam Bonavita spent time with Senator Specter. Interestingly enough, we hope Senator Specter will talk about Robert Jackson. In the flesh over here is a guy who connects the dots, interestingly enough, from Jackson, Warren, to Specter, Sam Bonavita. So I'll pause and just thank Sam, and he's a big supporter of the Jackson Center as well, and just give him an applause for this. The International Criminal Court, which I'll talk briefly about when Senator Specter is here, is the legacy of the Nuremberg trial. So that which is going on today at The Hague, that which is going on tribunals in Rwanda, Cambodia, Sierra Leone, are all legacies of the Nuremberg trial and something which Robert Jackson was intimately involved in. We've been to Germany. We've been to the courtroom. It's still there, courtroom 600, and they believe your guy, Robert Jackson, walks on water. Why? Because he was the architect of the trial. because at the time of the end of the war, they weren't sure whether they were going to have a trial. There was no complete agreement among the Allies that there would be a trial. So it was Jackson appointed by Truman to go over to sit down with the French, the Russians, the British, to decide if there would be a trial, what the trial would be about, who the defendants would be, and actually administer the trial. You'll actually have, there's a treaty that sets this all up called the London Agreement, and on behalf of the United States of America, signing the treaty is not the President of the United States, but in fact, Robert Jackson. Robert Jackson from Warren County, Pennsylvania, who never went to college, never graduated from law school, put himself in a position where he was the architect of the Nuremberg trial. And the folks in Germany, interestingly enough, were the folks, they say, Jackson was the architect. We, the Germans, would like to do as much as we can to honor Robert Jackson. And in fact, we've actually have an agreement with the city of Nuremberg. The Jackson Center has an agreement with the city of Nuremberg, and we'll be going over there to be part of a ribbon dedication of a museum in honor of the Nuremberg trial, which is remarkable when you think about Germany, who did not win the day. The trials were in Germany. The trial dealt with all of the leaders of the German government. Most of them were found guilty, some hanged, and yet here they are 60 years later actually pausing to commemorate that. And they're doing that to honor Robert Jackson. So that's a story a little bit about Robert Jackson. That's the reason for the fact that we have had a center set up in Jamestown, New York. We commend all you students, all of you. Come on over the border, because we're coming down here to have a chance to continue to learn something of which I didn't know that much about. I suspect this group over here, even though they're in the legal business, knew that there was a Justice Jackson. They knew there was a Nuremberg trial, that Jackson was part of it, and knew he was from someplace in Warren. But during the last few years, when all of a sudden you have Chief Justice Rehnquist, Justice Sandra Day O'Connor, you have members from the Nuremberg trial, you have members from the government, and like I say, Senator Specter, we've had Senator Clinton, Senator Schumer, and Senator Specter has talked about, very publicly, about Justice Jackson. That's a thrill, and that's why the education process, the fact that the Jackson Center is created, is hopefully to advance the knowledge base. All of you, please take the book, read it. It's designed for young readers, but therefore we'll all understand it. And it's a terrific opportunity. But I appreciate, David, the opportunity to talk a little bit about the Jackson Center, to talk about Robert Jackson. And if you want me to continue on,
You might as well continue.
All right.
The senator gets it.
We had a town hall meeting in Glade Township, so you must have gotten stuck on.
Okay, let me just ask for any questions regarding Jackson, because I'll use this as an opportunity. Yes?
What year was he born?
Born in 1892, Spring Creek Township. The next question you're going to ask is, did he have any kids? The answer is yes. 2, Bill Jackson, who was with him at the Nuremberg trial. He was the head of the Milbank Tweed law firm. He represented such folks as Nelson Rockefeller, Jackie Onassis, among others. He was here during the dedication of the statue. If you go to Jamestown, there is a Justice Jackson, Robert H. Jackson statue on the corner of 8th and Washington. Excuse me, that's not correct. 8th and North Main, and Bill Jackson was there. He died in 1999 before the commencement of a Jackson Center. You ask, is there any more kids? And the answer is yes. Mary Craig Hill, who died in 1999. She was also at the statue dedication. She was also at a dedication down in Spring Creek. There's a wonderful plaque down there, and I see the ace over there of all time. She put this all together, and I appreciate that. Take a bow. Thank you. If you haven't met her, give her a big hand, because she's done an awful lot to bring Spring Creek down. Pardon? Oh, Lynn, of course. I blew right through that, Lynn. And so Mary, and Jackson has 8 children, and 2 of them are involved in the board of the Jackson Center. Any other questions regarding Jackson? Yes? Pardon? Daughter? Oh, yes. Yeah, the daughter was Mary. Mary had 3 children, and they've been here frequently. Tom Loftus, Bob Loftus, and where am I drawing a blank? Julia, thank you. That's my beloved wife, by the way, over here. David, I missed that point completely. Any other questions anybody has? Students in particular? Did we talk a little bit about...
How long has the Jackson Center been around, and do you guys do any activities in Warren, Pennsylvania that we can participate in?
Sure. The answer is we've started only 7 years ago. We're a relatively young organization. If you haven't been to the facility, it's a 19,000 square foot facility, formerly owned by the Scottish Rite Consistory. And during that time period, we've had the biographers of Justice Jackson there. And we're going to pause right now because I see we have a very special guest. So. Hi, Senator Greg Peterson. How are you doing?
Hello, David. How are you?
Oh, I'm good, thank you. How are you? Everything going all right? I'm going to introduce you.
Okay.
And we'll go from there.
Okay.
Well, here I am again to introduce Senator Specter. Why don't you stand a little bit, Arlen, then you can sit down.
We were in law school together several weeks ago, and he was ordering me around then, and he's still doing that. As you can tell from our names, we were at the same part of the alphabet, and as a matter of fact, we sat next to each other, and I had to shield my paper because I didn't want him copying off me.
Well, most of what he said is true. Well, and the reason that we got to be close friends in addition to that is that there were a few of us who were married at that time. And Arlen was one and I was one. And we called ourselves the Brown Bag Club because we didn't go and eat, at the law school facilities and so forth. They gave us a little room downstairs. They had a ping pong table, remember that? And we ate our sandwiches there. And so that's how we got to be good friends. And then this year in Washington, Arlen called our class members together for a reunion. I guess it was, 55 years, I think, or something like that. Yeah. So it's been a while. And at that time, I asked him if he'd come on up at the instance of the Jackson Foundation. And so here he is. And I want to say to you that out in front of you, Arlen, we have Eagle Scouts here. We have students from Warren High School with their teachers and students from the St. Joseph School, pardon me, folks, for having to look at that, and members of the bar over here, a couple of retired judges, and and then in addition to that, we have a couple of commissioners. Terry Hawk and John Bortz are here from Warren County. I didn't introduce them before, I'm sorry. And so I guess that would about complete it, Arlen, and you can go ahead and begin your address, all right?
Thank you very much, David. Thank you. David and I look back on the law school days with great fondness. we are regular participants at the class reunion, and as David said, we had lunch together every day. It was strictly a financial matter. Lunch in the law school dining room cost $1, and neither Dave Swanson nor Arlen Specter had $1. That is not $1 to spare. We just didn't have $1, and it was a great experience. And I have visited David from time to time over the years. Before I got to the Senate, I brought my family here back 1 year on the way to Mackinac Island when I was district attorney of Philadelphia, and we have maintained our friendship. And when he suggested that I participate in this ceremony, I said I'd be delighted to do so. When the Senate is in recess, I make it a point to travel the state, to have town meetings, to make brief reports to the citizens as to what is going on in Washington. Not that you need a special report if you just turn on the news, TV or radio or newspapers full of activities as to what's going on with lots of problems in our society. But I make it a point to touch all of Pennsylvania's 67 counties every year. In a representative democracy, I think it's very important for people like a senator to stay in touch with his constituents. There's not a whole lot of confidence in what goes on in Washington, and it's important, I think, for those of us there to leave the Beltway and come out and talk to the people, to do as good a job as we can in a representative democracy. Robert H. Jackson is a legendary figure in our country, Pennsylvanian by birth, and most of his activities were in Jamestown, and came to Washington at the request of President Roosevelt in some very troublesome days in our nation's history. Worked at the Internal Revenue Service as general counsel, and then was an assistant attorney general and became attorney general, and a very, very distinguished Supreme Court justice. He has written some of the most often quoted opinions. Had a really sense for the core problem. Could really move, so to speak, to the jugular in a very graphic, articulate, and memorable way. He wrote one famous line that the Supreme Court is not final because it's infallible. The Supreme Court is infallible because it's final. Which is an honest way of putting it. The Supreme Court captions their writings as opinion of the court. Well, I think that's appropriate. It is their opinions, and they do have the last word. He also coined a very famous expression when he wrote that the Constitution is not a suicide pact. That there are some practical considerations as to what constitutional law means. And there is an ongoing debate as to the role of the Supreme Court. We all agree that the Supreme Court ought not to make the law, they ought to interpret the law, that making the law is a legislative function. And in a democracy, people elect members to the State House and the State Senate, or the United States House of Representatives, or the United States Senate. We are answerable to the people, and unlike federal judges who serve for life, those of us in elective office are subject to re-election. Some of my colleagues in the Senate think that there ought to be a constitutional amendment that judges ought to have to stand for election every 6 years, and life tenure ought to go to senators. That's the laugh line, ladies and gentlemen. But that idea hasn't gained too much currency. The opinion that I think Justice Jackson is best known for was a concurring opinion in a case called Youngstown Steel, where President Truman seized the steel mills. And one of the really vital parts about our structure in government is separation of powers, that no branch has too much power. And the Supreme Court of the United States decided in 1803 in Marbury versus Madison that the Supreme Court had the final word. Constitution doesn't say that. But when the Supreme Court decided it, they've made it stick for the life of our country, and somebody has to have the final word, and institutionally I think that has worked well for the country. And the Supreme Court has been independent, and notwithstanding Justice Jackson's close relationship with President Roosevelt, and President Roosevelt's appointing him when the famous Korematsu case came up about the internment of Japanese citizens during World War II, Justice Jackson dissented, said that that was an inappropriate and unfair infringement on the constitutional rights of the Japanese citizens. And that dissent and his reasoning in that case have come to be regarded as the appropriate decision. And there's been a lot of criticism of what was done to Japanese citizens during World War II. And in the steel seizure case, he wrote a concurring opinion which has been often cited in recent times when the conflict has arisen between the Congress and the President. Congress passed the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act in 1978, which provides that you cannot have a wiretap unless you get a warrant from a court. And that's the standard position, that before there may be an invasion of privacy, there has to be a statement of probable cause and an affidavit. You go to a judge before you listen in on somebody's private conversation. And President Bush has disregarded that statute in the terrorist surveillance program where they have warrantless wiretaps. And it's been quite a controversial subject. And President Bush has asserted that a statute cannot derogate or limit or intrude on the president's constitutional authority as commander-in-chief. That issue still hasn't been decided by the courts. It's had a torturous process through. A Detroit judge ruled the terrorist surveillance program was unconstitutional, and the Sixth Circuit reversed on standing grounds. That's a technical legal distinction as to whether the litigant has standing or the right to challenge it in court, and the Supreme Court wouldn't decide it. Frankly, they ducked it. I think if Justice Jackson were there, they wouldn't have ducked it. They would have taken the case. They, in my opinion, should have taken the case. I chaired the Judiciary Committee when the President put the terrorist surveillance program into operation, and he bypassed the Judiciary Committee. Traditionally, the chairman and the ranking member are informed about those matters. But Justice Jackson wrote in the concurring opinion in the Steele case that the governmental power is at its strongest when the President and the Congress join together. And presidential authority is at a medium point when the Congress has not said one way or another. And presidential authority is at its lowest point where the Congress has said the contrary, that you can't do something like warrantless wiretaps, and the President disagrees and steps in, notwithstanding a congressional statutory provision to the contrary. So in the hearings which we had 3 years ago for Chief Justice Roberts and Justice Alito, Justice Jackson was quoted very frequently in those proceedings, and they were really sort of historic proceedings in putting a man of 50 on as Chief Justice. Justice Stevens is 89 and still going strong. So Chief Justice Roberts could look forward to decades of service. Justice Alito was 55. Again, young men on the court. One aspect of Justice Jackson's career, which you know about, was that he was the a prosecutor at the Nuremberg trials, where the government international court proceeded against the Nazi war criminals, and it's quite a precedent for a sitting justice to take a leave of absence and do something else. And it has been often referred to when Chief Justice Warren served as chairman of the President's Commission on the assassination of President Kennedy. And I was one of the young lawyers who worked on that case. They couldn't get Swanson, he was too busy. So they chose me, and I had the opportunity to participate in that work, and have since had lots of challenges to the single bullet theory, which was my formulation. But on the relevant point as to Chief Justice Warren taking the job, I'll tell you a short story. When I ran for district attorney of Philadelphia in 1965, I had a photo op with President Eisenhower. It was arranged by Senator Scott. These photo ops are good for your campaign literature. I don't think President Eisenhower gave a hoot whether I was elected or not, but made a nice picture on my brochure. If you visit me in Washington, I've got it on my wall. So anyhow, President Eisenhower knew about my being assistant, one of the young lawyers on the Warren Commission staff, and he asked me a question. He said, why did Chief Justice Warren agree to serve as chairman of the commission? He shouldn't have done that. And I said, well, Mr. President, I can tell you what Chief Justice Warren told the staff. He called the staff together and he said, I took this job because I was asked by a lot of people to do it. He said the Solicitor General came to talk to me, Archibald Cox, and I said I turned it down. I said I'm too busy. The case might come before the Supreme Court, and I'm not going to do that. And then the Deputy Attorney General, Nick Katzenbach, came to Chief Justice Warren. He said I turned him down. Bobby Kennedy, the Attorney General, did not make the request. He was really broken up over the death of his brother. He said, and then President Johnson called me to the Oval Office and asked me to do it. And I said, no, I can't do it. I'm too busy, and the case may come to the Supreme Court. And then the President said to Warren, according to what Warren told the staff, he said, listen, Mr. Chief Justice, this is a big problem. There's a lot of concern that I'm not crying over the Warren Commission. I have had chemotherapy recently for Hodgkin's, and one of the consequences is I tear a lot. So I made the Kleenex industry rich. I just want you to know what's going on. And Johnson said to Warren, this fellow Oswald went to Russia and renounced his American citizenship and married a Russian woman. There's a worry the Russians may have been involved in the assassination. And he was on the Fair Play for Cuba committee. There's concern that Castro may have been involved in the assassination because of the Bay of Pigs incident. And Johnson then said to Warren, according to Warren, he said, if your commander-in-chief asked you to put on the uniform of your country in time of national emergency, would you turn him down? And Warren said, when the president said that, I just couldn't say no. And Eisenhower was listening to all of this with a scowl on his face. And he said, the Chief Justice is not under the president. If he was, I would have fired Warren a long time ago. So I thought about that this morning when I looked over my notes and recollected that Justice Jackson took leave of the court to take on another assignment. Well, it's a great pleasure to be with you and join you in this commemoration to a great American and native of this area. And a transplant to Jamestown. Thank you.
Contracts coach,
Okay.
you know.
Kessler?
Yeah, okay.
Fritz Kessler?
Yeah, okay.
You'll
Thank,
never forget, what's his name, wouldn't you?
no, I just wanted to tell you a story from law school about a contracts professor we had, Mr. Kessler. He came from Germany. He was the nicest kind of a fellow, and I will illustrate his by telling you this story, and it may have happened to Arlen too. I know we asked us this at a reunion once, said, what's your favorite thing that you remember about one of your professors? Well, Friedrich Kessler once asked me a question. He'd come here from Germany. I forgot to say that. And so there he was teaching us contracts. And he asked me a question, and I responded. Whereupon he said, a beautiful answer, Mr. Swanson, positively beautiful. But pardon me for saying so, you couldn't be wronger. Remember that line? And so he was the kindest. Now I'm going to come back to the Nuremberg trials. He was the kindest sort of a fellow, except that on one occasion he got to talking about Hitler and Germany in the times before the war. And then his mood changed. And he was just totally against that. So I think that works in to this proceeding today to show what it was that Jackson was attempting to write and put before us. Okay, I think that concludes that, except that you now, Greg, want to do some work in the way of presentations or something. Is that correct?
To Senator Specter, as the president of the Robert H. Jackson Center, and I had the pleasure of seeing you and meet you at Chautauqua Institution, and certainly have observed your entire career and your involvement with the Senate as senior member of the Senate Judiciary Committee, and often during the confirmation hearings of Justice Roberts and Justice Alito, the conversations that revolved around native son Robert Jackson. And the fact that even back in as early as 1994, you and Senator Dodd proposed resolution creation of the International Criminal Court, which in fact was the direct legacy of activities that occurred in Nuremberg, which is Robert Jackson being the chief American prosecutor there, and the person who probably was as much the architect for the creation of the trial, which in fact has found form in Cambodia and Rwanda and other places like that. On behalf of the Jackson Center, and just as a way to say thank you for all that you've provided to us, and to maybe give you an opportunity to put a portrait of native son Robert Jackson on the wall right there with President Eisenhower and hopefully the world champion Philadelphia Phillies. I suspect there is a little side wager going on with your colleagues from Florida regarding these upcoming activities. But anyways, as president of the Robert H. Jackson Center, and on behalf of all of the folks from Warren County, Pennsylvania, we'd just like to present to you a portrait of Justice Robert Jackson for you and your chambers.
Thank you.
I've just talked now with the senator, and he will entertain any questions that somebody might have. Arlen?
I'm looking at the picture of Justice Jackson. He's at the podium. He's a pretty tough-looking guy. Anybody have anything on their minds? Like to ask a question? Yes, ma'am?
I'm interested in knowing what law school you both attended.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Senator Specter, what's the current relationship between the United States and the International Criminal Court?
The United States is not a party to the International Criminal Court. I regret to say the concern has been expressed that we don't want to subject American citizens to international court. I think that it would be preferable if we did so, and the provisions of an international court do not take jurisdiction over a citizen of the United States where we have a judicial proceeding in the United States. If somebody acts improperly who's an American citizen, they have to answer to the United States government. And the International Criminal Court really is designed to reach people like Rwanda, the Sudan, or genocide. This young man has a question. Well, I didn't see it. Are you a scout? Are you an Eagle Scout? I know big wheel scouts. Yes, sir. What's up? How long? We're there 3 years. Law school takes 3 years. It's a great profession. Yes.
I'm a senior in high school and I'm hoping to go to college next year for political science, and I was wondering if you had any advice.
Any advice? Going to college for political science? Yeah. Study. Study and develop skills. And if you develop skills, you'll be a big man. There are many opportunities for young people who know how to analyze problems, know how to express themselves. Join the debate teams if there is one, and if there isn't one, insist that the school get one. My experience has been that that's the best training there is. You have a topic, you analyze it, you read about it, you study it, you learn how to speak extemporaneously, you learn how to express yourself precisely. I've hired a lot of people. When I was DA in Philadelphia, I had a staff of 170 lawyers. One of my assistants was a fellow named Rendell. Law school. I found you want to be an assistant DA and be famous. Run for the public office. I found he was a very promising young lawyer, and now he's governor. He's making a lot of promises. If you see him, you can mention it, and I say it with some frequency. He's heard it. Another one of my assistants was a fellow named Castile. He's the Chief Justice of Pennsylvania. Another one of my assistants. You've heard enough of my assistants. And 3 college professors, a lot of 3 college presidents, and a lot of serious people. Let me see how many questions there are. I'll know how long my answer is. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, I'll take all 4 questions.
Okay, I'd like to know what inspired you to be a lawyer, and after that, what inspired you to be a politician?
You said I was a politician. I was inspired to go into public service because of my father. My father was 18 in Russia in 1911, and the Tsar wanted to send him to Siberia. And he didn't want to go to Siberia. He heard it was cold. He wanted to go to Kansas instead, close by. Got to Kansas, and that's where I was born. And my father served in World War I. He went to the Argonne Forest where he was wounded in action. And the government promised all World War I veterans a $500 bonus. That was a lot of money, especially for the Depression. And the government broke the promise. President Hoover ordered the Army out when the veterans had a march on Washington. Today you have a march on Washington. Your constitutional right to petition your government. The Army fired on veterans on that day. And they actually just said, hello to you. How are you? Nice to see you. Days a lot. Haven't seen you in a long time. And the Army fired on those veterans and killed World War I veterans in Washington that day, one of the blackest days in American history. And in a sense, I've been on my way to Washington ever since to get my father's home. And I haven't gotten it yet, so I'm running for re-election. I'm really very serious about that. The government breaks promises all the time. And you need people to go to Washington to protect the little guys like my dad. Three more questions. Yes, sir. You're number 2 on the way to 4.
Are you comfortable with how the Supreme Court is headed? Do you feel that judicial activism is a threat to that court? Or are you pretty comfortable with the condition of the court?
I think judicial activism is a threat. And there are activists on all sides. And I believe that we're best served if the court acts on interpreting the Constitution and interpreting the laws as opposed to the broad policy decisions they make. That's a difficult standard to apply. It's easy to state, as I just did, difficult to apply. But I think historically the court has been a very sound institution. I think they need to be a little more concerned about civil rights today than they are. I think they have to take these controversial decisions and decide them. I think you are seeing a lot that's happening, but we have not really respected civil rights enough with the Geneva Convention. That's a deep subject, and that's a very obviously short answer. I'll save the need for last. But one more question is, number 3 on the way to 4? Yes, sir.
I was curious about the controversial subject of global warming. And before I moved back to Warren County, I worked at the Goddard Space Center outside of Washington, Warming Solar Observatory. And of course, we studied solar phenomena. Then recently, the head of NASA indicated that there's a lot we don't know about global warming. It's going to call for a lot more research before we come to conclusions. And I heard that there's a buildup of ice in the South Pole, and we're losing ice.
I've got your question.
Okay.
We can study global warming forever. We can study virtually any subject forever. I believe there is pretty much consensus that global warming is a problem. And the question is what we do about it. President Bush is very reluctant to acknowledge global warming, but he has said we have a problem. And I think we have to act on it, but in a sensible way. Senator Bingaman and I have legislation in to deal with it as an alternative to the Lieberman-Warner bill, which sets standards which we don't have the technology to fulfill. And we have to cap emissions in a way which does not put us at a big disadvantage with other countries like China. But I think global warming is an issue. We have to deal with it. We have to deal with it sensibly. You've got the last word. What is your name? How old are you? Almost 12. That means you're 11. Okay, what's your question? Where General Jackson grew up. Yeah, he grew up born in Spring City.
Spring Creek.
And he moved to Jamestown, New York. And he lived there, and they had a different way of becoming a lawyer in those days. He studied law for a year, was a lawyer, and he was in school for a short time, never graduated. He became a famous Supreme Court justice. Well, ladies and gentlemen, you have a great community here. I was just